you ready for the mayhem?
Hosted by Mike, the Big Cheese.
Welcome back to the Heavy Metal Mayhem Radio Show. It is Sunday, April 30th. I cannot believe this month is over already. 4 months gone for 2023. The older we get, the quicker these weeks and months start going by us, I have to tell you. But right there, the original Vikings, Faithful Breath with Gold and Glory. I'll get into a little story about them in a second. But, this band has been around since 1967. I mean, the year I was born. They wanted to name the Magic Power back then, before becoming Faithful Breath, and they carried on with that name until around '86 when they didn't really break up. They just kind of reformed as a band called Risk, and they put out quite a few records under that name. But it wasn't until around '83 with Hard Breath that people really started getting into this group, and they were kind of big where they came from. I mean, they weren't really Vikings; they were from Germany, but I mean, they had that whole Viking image. But I remember it was 1985, around this time, I want to say. Golden Glory had come out a few months before that. The band was coming to America for the first time. And my old co-host and my best bud, Tommy Flang, his Van Tempest were opening up for them. There was another band on the bill. I just can't think of who it was right now. I have to go look at the tapes. I recorded that show. And they played at a place out here in Staten Island where I live today. Back then I lived in Brooklyn, New York. It was called Club Intimate or the Intimate Club. I don't remember. It was a little divey, but I remember getting there, and I was telling Tommy like for weeks, Faithful Breath of this big band from Germany. They're coming over here. It's going to be a great big show. There's going to be a lot of people there. I was like so excited that Tommy's band had a chance to open up for like a big band and an international band. But being such an underground fanatic back then, I guess in my head I made it out to be bigger than they really were. And when they came here, there was like nobody in the club. I mean, the only people that were there were all the friends of the bands that were playing that night besides them. And they had a pretty big tour lined up. I mean, they were going pretty much throughout the whole country, if I remember back then. And I was writing, my friend Roberta had a magazine called Buried Alive. She put out quite a few issues of this magazine out of Connecticut. And I used to write some articles for her back in the mid-'80s. And I said, no, I'm going to interview the band and I'll send you an interview. And it was a horrible, horrible interview. Because the club is very loud. I'm doing it on an old Walkman trying to record it. I didn't really know what to ask these guys. I didn't prepare for it or anything like that. Just like you kind of do now. Nothing's changed in the last 40 years. But I interviewed the band, I asked a whole bunch of dumb questions, and I kept like reassuring them. They were like really upset that there was nobody in the club and they were getting ready to come on. And about 20 minutes, I'm like, oh, it's going to get crowded, don't worry. The place is going to be packed in like 15, 20 minutes. It's going to get busy, don't worry. And when they get on the stage, there were even less people there because everybody that came to see the opening bands sort of winded out and left at that point in time. But I stood there and they were great and they sounded great. And I'm a big fan of these guys till today. I wish they would kind of get back together. Risk broke up sometime in the 90s, I want to say, in the late 90s. It'd be great to see a reunion of these guys and maybe just kind of do the festival circuit for a year. I think that would be a pretty cool thing. All right, but hey, I forgot our guest tonight. How can I do that? We got great ones. Claude Schnell from Dio is on tonight. We'll have him on the second half of the show. And Mark Sutcliffe from Trespass. We did this interview last week right before the Keep It True Festival. And I finally got to see most of, if not all of, the live bands that were up on YouTube from Keep It True. And a lot of them sounded really great, especially Trespass. So we'll be talking to Mark in about 20 minutes or so. We're going to play some music between now and then. I think we'll keep the news and all the other stuff down tonight to the bare minimum because we do have two guests to get through, and then it'll be May before you know it. All right, so how about we do a little thruster, Screams of Pain.
In a country where there were no walls, no castles to defend, the king in all his wisdom was so loyal to the end. But peace would never reign for long, to paint the story grey. The mighty son of Genghis Khan was planning to invade. Those Asian soldiers with awesome faces, they planned on a victory. There's a saying in the East, the sword is your soul. The sword is your soul. Samurai. The mighty are themselves destroyed like dust before the wind. The sword is your sword. The sword is your
All right, Grand Prix with Samurai, and right before that, Majestic Right with Promise of Power. Like I said to email on the chat room, I've been trying to get Nick Trotty on the show for a while. It hasn't worked. Maybe I'll reach out to the singer and try to get him on the program. We'll see if we have any more luck with him. And in the chat, you guys were talking about, vinyl records. I read an article yesterday about vinyl, how it's been outselling CDs for the last couple of years. Downloads are still like the number one way of people get music today, but they were saying that 50% of the people that have been buying the vinyl records don't even own a record player or a turntable. So I guess they're just buying them as artwork or just to collect them, to have them in a collection. I can't think of any other reason why you'd buy a vinyl record and not play it, but I have all my vinyls. I have all my records from the 80s still, from the 70s and 80s. And I play, a few of them got kind of damaged from being a heater in the old house. I got a little warped, but I still have them. I'm abused the hell out of it because I play them nonstop. I don't buy them to collect them. I mean, there's some great artwork on them, but, records are meant to be played, so I don't know why you waste all your money buying them. Well, you're not really wasting your money because you're supporting the band, so I shouldn't say that, but buy the record, play the damn record. Don't hang it up on a frame on your wall. Buy it and play it. That's what the music is meant for. Alrighty here. Yesterday I was watching TV and Anvil, the documentary, was on Showtime. I think it's going to be on the whole month. So if you have Showtime, you can check out the Anvil documentary, the story of Anvil, if you don't or you haven't seen it already. And I was watching it. I was just listening to him crying over and over again for 2 hours about how the band got left behind, how they never got the big break. And we've had Lips on the show I don't know how many times, and every time he's on the show he talks about the same thing, how they got passed on, how they got passed by. Why it didn't work for them, I don't know. Maybe because, by the time Metal and Metal came out in 1982, the scene started to explode. Metallica's first record was out. They were bringing on a new era of the music. Slayer, Merciful Fate, all these bands were putting out records. And I guess, Anvil being Anvil, they were just putting out the same record over and over again every year. Nothing changed with those guys. And I guess other bands just surpassed them. So I don't really know the reason of it. But when I did bring it up to Lips the last time he was on the show a few months ago, he definitely got a little testy with me. I said, how long are you going to live off the, the fame of the documentary? And he didn't kind of like that. But he's definitely a character. I'll give him that. Let's play some Anvil. After this, I'll come back on. We'll play something off the new Trespass record. Talk to Mark Sutcliffe. Well, we already spoke to Mark. It's pre-recorded, this interview. And we've got Claude Schnell on in about 45 minutes or so live right after this. So here's some Metal on Metal. All right, so Manville, Metal on Metal. My favorite part of that documentary is when they were backstage at some festival and Lips is running around talking to everybody. He's got Michael Schenker cornered and Carmine Appice is telling them stories about stuff they did at one time that they thought they remembered. They were staring at him like, who the hell is this guy? I love that part. All right, Trespass. We're going to talk to Mark Sutcliffe in a few minutes. The band has a brand new record out, Wolves at the Door. Their third one since getting back together, or just getting back together under the Trespass name, I should say, in 2014. Here we go off the brand new record. I don't know, what can we do? Let me see. How about we play Man and Machine? Here you go. Mark, this is Mike. How are you?
Hi, Mike. I'm good, thank you.
It's a pleasure to talk with you. I'm sorry we missed each other last week.
It's a beautiful day here in England.
I'm glad. The weather is changing here too in the U.S. The spring is finally coming.
I'm glad to hear it.
Listen, it's a pleasure to have you on here today. And being such a big fan of the band, going back to, I hate to say 81 because it really makes me feel old, but it goes that far back.
Hey, it makes you feel old.
But they were great times back then, and it's amazing when you think about it. 40 something years the band's been going on in one form or another, and I think you're at your finest point right now.
That's very kind of you to say. It's strange, really, because I've often said that when we started in '79, um, it's weird because I obviously I really got sort of '75 when I was a teenager. I really got into Purple and Sabbath and bands like that, and they seemed like they were to us at that age. They seemed like were from another era, but of course they were only kind of 10 years older than us.
True. And they're still playing today.
But yeah, well, I think that was something that no one could predict. I thought it sounds like a really strange thing to say, but I already thought, like in '75 with Glenn Hughes and Tommy Bolin, that Deep Purple were washed up. You know, that was it, kind of thing. And being the new generation coming along, of course, reinforced that. But if somebody had told me that Purple and Ozzy and people like that would still be playing now, I'm not sure I would have believed them.
That's
But I'm
true.
glad. I'm glad because
Absolutely. Mark, when you think about it, like you were saying, those guys were considered the old guard back then. And then there were people like you coming up through the scene. And, you kind of took what you were into at the time, which was bands like Deep Purple and Status Quo, because that's what we all kind of grew up on back then. But you guys took it and did something completely new and different with it. And there were a lot of bands in that group of the late 70s that were turning something old into something new. I mean, how do you create new?
oh, that's a really hard question. Actually, my brother had some really interesting American influences, bands that perhaps were a little bit more obscure, although one of them was Kiss. I mean, and so he brought his kind of slightly different perspective. And I do honestly think that bands are the music that comes out of bands. I mean, I'm always have been the main writer, but I guess your personality, your particular mix of these things. And I don't think I've ever set out truly to think, well, this is the kind of music I'm playing. I'm going to play. Because when you think about it, so many rock bands are like two guitars, bass drums, maybe keyboards, and there's so many bands who fit into that basic set of instruments, and yet such diversity. And I think that's what's great about it. I guess I've always written. I don't think we even our very first concert. I mean, our first concert was March the 11th, 1979, and we were playing covers then, mostly Lizzie and stuff like that. But we played original material too at that first show, and that's something for me, that's what it's about.
Joe, was it hard when you're playing a show back then and you're an unknown band? Was it hard introducing originals into the set? Were the fans like saying, "Hey, I want to hear something new," or just give me more Thin Lizzy?
Well, actually, what happened was, and this is a true story. We started to play around the sort of local scene, and we were playing Lizzie, UFO, Bad Company, Free, that kind of stuff, in our own way. And we were very lucky. My brother was such a great drummer that we could do songs like Bad Reputation by Thin Lizzy, where the drums and Emerald, which are real drum. Because Brian Downey from Thin Lizzy is one of the greatest rock drummers of all time, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
And so we were able to do some stuff. But what we did was, right from the start, was put our own tracks in. And what used to happen was, a girl would come up to me at the end and say, "Who was that song by? I want to buy their records." And of course, it was ours. So I kind of knew we were onto something. And also what I tried to do was, when we wrote a song, I did listen to the bands that I really loved, and I thought, well, I don't mind bringing some elements of what I love to my own music. And because I've seen going around, when you're playing in a band, you go and see other bands to see check them out, and so many bands, young bands, they'll play some covers, yeah, pretty good, then when they play their original material, they go off on a complete tangent. It doesn't sit in the set at all. They go off somewhere else completely. So I just did what I loved, and it worked.
That it did. I mean, Mark, when you think about the time, I mean, you guys came from a small area. There was a big scene going on in London, some of the bigger cities in England at the time. Did you feel isolated from the rest of the scene? Because today, we're so connected with the internet and, the social media. But back then, it wasn't as easy as people make it sound, when you're in a smaller town. I remember it well because, I mean, where we grew up is only kind of 60 miles from London, from central London. But because East Anglia, the bit of England that sticks out to the east, isn't served that well by motorways. Everybody, when I was talking to people in London about where we were from, I never said the town that we were from, Sudbury. I always said Cambridge or Colchester because they just hadn't heard of. And I remember Jeff Barton, who was the editor of Kerrang back then, described where we came from as a bucolic backwater. And I remember having to look it up in the dictionary. See what it meant.
To see what it meant. He said the boonies or the backwoods. I don't know, but he didn't. He said the back. I thought, what the hell's he talking about?
Yeah.
It was called a one-horse town and all that kind of stuff by the press. And it's interesting because, Britain's heavy metal music comes from cities of heavy industry. Birmingham, Sheffield, where maybe people were a little bit Trespass coming from the countryside. Maybe that just gave us a slightly different angle. It's a little. Perhaps we're not quite as heavy as some. We've always tried to be a fairly melodic band. But yeah, I mean, what happened with us? I mean, it's a long story, but it was that we were so young and naive, and we were kind of younger than most of the bands that took off, like Def Leppard and Saxon, Iron Maiden. They're 4 or 5 years older than us. So, my brother was. Here's a little stat for you. When we recorded One of These Days, my brother had only been playing the drums 18 months.
Wow.
Yeah, he'd only actually got a drum kit 18 months before and was a total natural. He just went into that seat and bang. And me and him being close, I think that's where some of the music came from, And so we went in the studio and we were green. We were really green. So we when One of These Days came out and started to get really noticed. In fact, we were told it might have even, if they'd been able to shift it quickly enough, it might have charted, But we did it on an independent label and everything was a bit slow and out in the country. And then the record industry started to ring me up. And we didn't have a phone then, so I had to run to my auntie's house.
Wow.
To answer the phone. So backward we were, we were still using drums back then. But and the guy, somebody said, "Oh, you've got to get a front man and be like Deep Purple. You've got to have this front man at the front." And I, being a real big Thin Lizzy fan, I knew you could be a front man and play an instrument as well. And that's what I wanted to do. But I allowed myself, being very young and naive, to be talked into changing things. And yourself, when something starts to trip over in the industry and something starts to grow, you've got to grab it with both hands. If you delay at all, if you pause to think, it's already moved on. And that's what kind of happened with us, really.
Yeah.
And that's around the time that Lars Ulrich and James Hetfield started to write to us.
Sure. When you think, you had the singles in the EP in the early days going into 1981. And do you think that was one of the stepping stones that was hard to get over because there were a few singers that came in and out of the band at that time? Yourself, was also singing. Do you think it was hard for the fans to focus when there was a different lineup or a different singer?
Yeah, of course. That was my fault. That was being young and green and maybe lacking a bit of confidence because looking back on it now, I honestly would have rather I went out as as how I really wanted to be, and failed, than failed by messing around with things. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I'm a real kind of left wing kind of guy when it comes to most things in life, but when it comes to music, I'm a dictator. I can't help thinking that if I'd been allowed to really get my hands on the steering wheel, at least I would have had purity, even if it failed. And one of the things about the new album is, for me, it really, I've sort of kind of got my hands on the levers of power, perhaps a little bit more, and there is a freedom there, and I have done pretty much all that I wanted to do. There were more songs. I mean, the album's starting to get some good reviews, actually, that I'm really pleased about. Maybe a bit more up-tempo stuff, but Trespass have never really gone down that road. We're kind of a different kind of band, but no, I am pleased with the album. I think it's one of the best things we've done, even though I say so myself.
No, absolutely. Wolf of the Door, I think, is one of your most solid releases. And when you think about it, I mean, 3 records in the last 8 years, 9 years, that was more of an output than you had in the heyday of the band in the earlier days. I mean, and I think it really has defined who the band is. And when I heard the band, I mean, because if you go back to the 80s, 81, I mean, after the EP came out, we didn't have a lot of media back then. There were some fanzines out. So it was years before some people in other countries realized the band had even broken up. But then Blue Blood came around not long after that. That's when I realized, they're not Trespass anymore. It's a different band and a different sound. But that was kind of where things were going at that time also.
Yeah, that was the ultimate, me losing my grip. I mean, I love songwriting. It's something I really enjoy. And if somebody sets me a challenge to write a song like this or like that, I guess I had a young child at the time, and my brother managed to talk me into changing the name. We did reform as Trespass in '86, and we did some demos. None of it ever got heard, and then we changed our name to Blue Blood. It was a much more high energy, American influenced kind of thing, I mean, there were some great bands around at that time, American bands that I was really influenced by, Americans and Canadian as well, Helix and bands like that. Real sort of enjoy yourself kind of music, But yeah, I don't regret the Blue Blood thing, but it was much more of an industry based idea.
Absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't even compare that to Trespass. To me, it was a whole different band, and it was what was going on at the time. It was more AOR oriented. It was more rock radio oriented. And I think to be in that genre, I think you guys definitely accomplished what you needed to go, do to be in that genre. It was great. And I remember in '93-4 when Head came out, I was like, Trespass has got a new record, and it was a different sounding record than earlier Trespass and Blue Blood, even different than what you guys came back at, in 2014.
Yeah. I think Head was an interesting experience, but I think maybe it was I kind of backlashed too heavily away from what I'd been doing, and went a bit too dark.
Well, I mean, over the decades, I mean, obviously your influences are going to change. Things you listen to change. So do you kind of have to write for the fans? So, what, I have to write, like one of these days because that's what the fans want, or you just have to kind of write what you feel because you are a musician and you're an artist?
Well, the latter really. But like, for instance, we're about to play Keep It True in Germany, and they've asked us to do an old school set, which is a bit of a strange thing to do when you've got a new album out that you're proud of. So because I don't like being told what to do, I'll probably play something I want to play anyway. But of course the fans want to hear the stuff. I mean, Deep Purple have to play Smoke on the Water and Highway Star, don't they? So,
yep.
Okay, they get paid more than I do, but still, you've got to love those songs. I mean, you've got to love them. To me, songs are actually more important than the artists in some way. I mean, look at the tribute industry, which is something that irritates me very much.
Yeah, it's true.
When people start to try and walk like the guy or have their teeth done to look like the guy and all that kind of thing, which is, I have dabbled with myself with a Status Quo tribute for a little while. It's music I love, don't get me wrong. And, you know, you learn 40 Status Quo songs or whoever it is, and you play it to a decent standard. That's a big ask. But at a recent show, I did say to the audience, I said, well, thank you very much. Because the theatre we played at, they always sell out when they have tribute bands there. And you know, we did okay. We didn't quite sell out, but we did okay. Thanks everyone for turning out to support original music. Because after all, if there aren't any original bands, there'll be nobody left to tribute.
That's right. That's great.
So, but they all laughed anyway, so it was okay.
True. I mean, like you said, we keep it true. They want you to do an old school set, and there were so many great old songs. But with all the records that have come out since then, all the music you've made since then, you know, fans that are fans of Trespass want to hear a little bit of everything. And I get, you know, he has a certain thing he wants you to do with that festival. But when you think about it, not to hear anything off of Wolf at the Door, that would be disappointing if I was going to see Trespass live.
I know. I mean, we've got a guy coming from Rio just to see us.
Wow.
You know, the guy, he must be getting on the plane any minute, I should think. But yeah, I mean, you've got to play for people. You've got to, you know, that's it. I mean, one of the things, and going back to what you were saying at the start, I mean, it's a family, this thing. It's a family, and people are loyal, you know, to the music and to the bands and to each other. And of course, the record industry hate that because they want a fast turnover. They don't like heavy rock music, not because it's not the music, it's the loyalty of the fans and the fact that they stick with it, you know, in their 60s and 70s. I mean, it's amazing.
It really is. You know, Mark, when you recorded the Trespass record in 2015, was it intended to go out and try to redo what you did in the past and make things different?
What happened there was I became a bit irritating to the other guys who really, quite honestly, wanted to forget the whole thing. Actually, I had some of the material that ended up on Footprints then, and some other things, and they didn't make it eventually. And you get, you know, sometimes songs make it through, sometimes they don't. But the only thing I could persuade the guys to do was to re-record some of the old classics, you know, with a consistent sound and a consistent lineup. I don't think any of them really intended to take it any further than that. That's all I could get them to do. But what happened was, of course, that rekindled my spark, and I burst into flame in terms of writing. And I had all this material, but I just couldn't get the original guys to get involved with that. So I ended up having to form a new lineup to move on from there. And so that's what we did, you know. And so it opened a few doors. I think it sort of, you know, obviously COVID got in the way of Wolf at the Door a little bit. I've had some of that material for a long time.
Yeah. With the re-recorded songs, did you feel like there were any of them that you wanted to kind of right or wrong that maybe took place in the original writings that you weren't happy with, or did you just want to kind of update some of them? You know, because it sounds more like Trespass of today.
Yeah, they are updated a little. I think that's because a lot of the material, a lot of the stuff that was available to people, like on some of the compilations and that, I mean, they're demos. They're demos. I mean, they were practically played live. There was no attempt at production or thinking about the song. So yeah, we did revisit them a little.
You know, a couple of years later, Footprints in the Rock come out, and I thought that was such an amazing record because it had a little bit of the old and a little bit of the new mixed together, and it was like what I thought Trespass would have been like if you guys were continually recording music over all those decades. I said, this is where I think the band would have been at right now, no matter where they went.
Well, that's a real compliment. Thank you very much, because that's what I was kind of trying to do, to build a bridge. I mean, obviously, like going back to what we were saying before, when we write, it just comes out. I mean, a couple of guys that have interviewed me have asked me, somebody actually said this record sounds like it's come straight out of the 80s. I thought, what? No, that certainly wasn't my intention. But we just do what we do. I mean, and I try to make it sound as good as I can. But it's kind of a compliment on the one hand, because it's saying that the band sounds like Trespass. And at the same time, you think, oh, I thought I'd moved on a bit more than that. But yeah, I mean, it's, we just do what we do. A bit more melody than some, perhaps. Not the kind of lead vocal. I've never wanted to Trespass. I mean, obviously, if Ronnie Dio had said, "Can I come and sing in Trespass?" I would have let him. I mean, that would have been my dream lineup, I think. I would have had, Roger Glover and Ian Pace on drums and Ronnie Dio on vocals and John Lord on keys, I think.
Your dream band. Yeah, who wouldn't want that? But I think you guys are in a good spot right now and in a good place, and it really shows at Wolf on the Door. And, was this album recorded before COVID or after it? Because a lot of bands had recordings going on at the time, and they kind of held on to them because they didn't want to release it during then because they didn't know what was going to happen with the scene or live shows or anything else.
Well, what happened was, I mean, this is a bit of a sad story, but what happened was I had built myself a studio, but then because of pressures of COVID and my mother had some problems with her mental health, and anyway, long story short, I ended up splitting up with the woman that I was with at the time, and I lost the studio. But I had used it in that period to write most of the material that's on Wolf at the Door, and that was done during COVID, really. And I didn't know quite what was going to happen with our record company. And when I finally managed to send them some stuff, but actually there's probably another 10 songs from that session that didn't make it onto the album. Different things, and I mean they may be on a later one, maybe if we do another one. But I do feel something. A bit of an undercurrent, with this album that I'm really hoping it will open a few doors for us and give us a chance to get out and play a bit more to some audiences that perhaps we haven't been able to before.
I hope that happens. Look, you come from a time like me where, record company was king, and, as a young guy in a band, you're looking to sign to those major labels, Atlantic, CBS, EMI. Right. And now 30, 40 years later, we've seen the destruction of those labels, especially for certain genres of music like metal and rock. If it isn't pop music or AOR, they don't want to be bothered with you anymore. Are you happier today with the way the scene is, considering that bands really have 100 complete control over the music? There's nobody influencing them anymore. Nobody's saying, well, we want to sign you because we love your music, but we're going to change everything about you after we sign you because we want you to sound like whatever's going on at the time. That doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah, that's true. The idea that somebody would these days would try and tell me what I was doing was wrong or want to change it. Yeah, that isn't even in my head now. So that is an improvement, isn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely. Do you ever feel like there was a turning point in the band, maybe a decision you made that you kind of backfired on you? You really thought it was the right one, then years later, like, I don't think I should have did that.
Yeah, well, like I mentioned before, and I wouldn't have got a lead singer. I would have continued with the band in its more raw form, I think. The thing is, we didn't really get a chance to develop. I think possibly the new wave of heavy metal swept over us before we were really ready. Another couple of years, maybe. We were very young and green, and I felt the pressure. And an interesting little story. I mean, maybe back in the day, I was a little bit bitter towards some of the singers as well, because I felt like they'd been imposed on me, and it wasn't their fault. They were all nice guys, but we went into a great, huge, cavernous BBC studio to record a session for the Friday night rock show with Tommy Vance, and Tony Wilson produced it, and he's worked with everyone.
Yeah,
Deep Purple, you name it. Really influential guy in the BBC on the music side in those days. And he said, "What have you got this singer in for?" He said, "I prefer your voice. Why don't you sack him now?" So, and I went, "What?"
Yeah.
That was a turning point. If I'd have had the cojones to go and say, "See you, Steve." And I would have done the session, and we'd have been back on track again. But I just didn't have what it takes. I'm afraid I was too nice.
That's the case with a lot of bands. I mean, everybody refers to the new wave of British heavy metal as as a sound, but it was really a movement that was taking place back then. And so many bands fell into the same trap. They came out in the late 70s, and by 82, 83, they were done. They were all young kids. They just didn't know what was going on. And who would at that time? It was so new. Everything happened around you. I mean, I can only imagine what it must have felt like saying, we were there, we were part of it, and it passed us by, but you were like one of 100 bands that happened to, because everybody's like a bunch of kids back then, just looking to play music and not really so involved in what the business part of it was about also.
Yeah, that's right. And I remember I was in the audience at the O2 in London, and Metallica came on to do their encore and started playing One of These Days. I mean, you can imagine, can't you, what that was like? I mean, to feel that you've had that kind of influence, it's quite nice. Yeah.
Absolutely. I can only imagine.
I just wish they'd cover it.
As long as you get the royalties from it, that's all that matters.
Yeah.
Well, Mark, I'm not going to keep you, man. It was a pleasure talking. I know you got Keep It True coming up this week. I mean, I'm going to be watching on the live stream. I won't be there in Germany, but I can't wait to see you guys up there performing. Wolf at the Door, Trespass's finest record to date, May 26th on From the Vaults. Everybody has to buy this record. And you can actually get a real record today, not just a CD or a download. They all come out on vinyl again.
That's right. And I mean, obviously, when our first single came out, vinyl was it. I mean,
Yeah.
Because at that time in the UK, that was the punk scene and the independent label scene kind of crossed over with the new wave of British heavy metal. So there were small labels and independent people. So that's and so you got your notoriety managing to avoid the major labels to start with. I mean, we should. The industry missed out, I think, by not signing us and signing perhaps some other bands that seemed more of the genre. But I will always wonder what that first album would have been like with a decent producer and a bit of help. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you're here now with new records, and I'm glad for that, because you're getting better with age.
Yeah. Thanks ever so much.
You take care, Mark. Have a safe trip over to Germany and enjoy yourselves there.
Thanks a lot.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Sharpened stick, the shattered stone.
right, I want to thank Mark from Trespass. What a great new record they put out. Go and pick up a copy of it. All right, we're going to get to Claude in about 10 minutes. I'm going to play, we'll do our demolition segment, play something by Dio, and get Claude on the line. This band is called Cutthroat. Hard to believe there were like 5 bands named Cutthroat that all came out around the same time in the late 80s. But these guys were out of Cleveland, Ohio. I think they were around for less than 2 years, maybe 88 to 90, if even that. They put out one demo tape, the self-titled Cutthroat demo from 89, and then kind of faded into the woodwork. But it was a pretty solid demo, a good thrash metal band, and, I guess they kind of got lost in the mix, so who the hell knows what happened to them. But here you go. Cutthroat. We'll do Dying Earth. All right, Dio with Mystery. Let's get Claude on the line right now and make this interview happen.
Well, I wonder who this could be.
Hey, Claude, how are you, my friend?
I'm good, man. How about yourself, Mike?
I'm doing great. It took a while to make this happen, but we finally connected.
Hey, good things take good time, right?
That's right. And considering that you're going to be in New York again, things are even better.
That's right. That's right. Let's not advertise that though.
Oh, excuse me. I apologize. We'll cut that out. Don't
That's
worry.
all right. Yeah. Oh, are we already recording?
You're on live, but most people listen to the replays,
well,
and we'll
thanks
just
for pointing that out, dude. That was nice to know.
We'll just wipe that out. But it's great. It's great talk with you. Such a big fan of your keyboard playing, and you really made an impact on the scene when you think about it. It's hard to believe it's been like over 4 decades that you've been out there playing and making music.
I could never enjoy being reminded of that fact as often as possible.
I know. We're getting older, but you know what? We're still doing it, and that's all that matters.
What matters is that we were around to do it when we did it. That's really what matters. To have been around at a time when music was just such a fundamental part of everybody's life. I mean, it wasn't like just some people were into music. I mean, it was almost like a religion. I mean, everybody knew. What do you listen to? Even if you weren't a rock guy, even if you were like new age, or if you were like a country guy, or if you were whatever genre of music it was, everybody had their music. It was like I said, it was like a religion. Everybody was music was a huge part of everybody's life, which doesn't really seem to be the case anymore, which is really, really tragic, I think.
That's so true. Do you think it's mostly because of the change in the industry? When the labels kind of fell apart and bands had to do it on their own, and social media came in, then the downloading started with Napster and all those other sites. Do you think that was sort of the beginning of the end?
I think it's just because music sucks now.
Well, that's a good reason, too.
Not really. No, of course not. Of course not. Actually, I'm surprised every so often. I was pretty dismissive for a long time of the newer stuff that was coming along because there wasn't very much that appealed to me. And then suddenly, this little blossom of sound came through the soil, and I'm listening to something. That's really good. Somebody had a legit message there. So yes, to answer your question without my tongue stuck in my cheek, yes, I think it's completely a matter of the change, not only in the industry and the technology, but the accessibility that came with that. There simply isn't enough time to be involved to the depth that we used to be. I mean, back in the day, if you were a fan of a band, you spent a lot of time. You spent a lot of your time being an active fan, whether it was listening to records or going to the store or looking for articles in Hit Parade or Cream or whatever magazine it might have been. There were a lot of facets involved with being into a certain group or even a certain genre of music. If you were a metal guy or a rock guy, whatever, there were lots of things. And I'm not just talking about just going to concerts and so forth, but it was almost like on a day-to-day thing. There were DJs who listened. I mean, I remember growing up in New York back in the day. I'd never missed listening to Alice in Steel on NEW back in the day, just because I was so into that new format. This was like at the dawn of cool FM stations and stuff. So I think with all the distractions that exist as a result of all the new technology, there's just not enough time to spend on any one particular thing. I think the 90s were kind of like the beginning, I think, of the development of the short attention span theater thing.
Yeah.
People want instant gratification. They want, they want to. I mean, you could argue that it all kind of started when streaming began, because even if you bought an album that you only bought because there was one song that you wanted to hear, if you spent $5, $6, however many dollars you had to spend on a record, you'd listen to the whole record anyway because you were literally invested in it. And then you would likely hear something that you didn't expect to, and hopefully something that you liked. That fostered almost a grassroots kind of growth of the fans with their bands. now that that doesn't happen anymore. It's you pick and choose, and you get your endorphin rush, and you move on to whatever the next thing is. And don't even get me started, like with TikTok, for example. Where,
I won't.
That's an entire platform based on the assumption that people don't have more than I don't even know what the time constraint is, but X amount of seconds that they're willing to pay attention to something.
It's true, but that is that generation.
Say again?
It's true, but that's the generation that watches TikTok. That's that younger generation.
Exactly. Well, that's my point. And all right, so let's try to be not old farts and not objective about it. The truth is that the attraction there is that you get a lot of these endorphin hits where you get to enjoy a lot of different things. But the negative side, which I think is a significant consideration, is that if you're always going from peak to peak to peak to peak, you never get to find the satisfaction that comes with developing a taste for something. It's always just about the rush. It's always just about the payoff. You want to get you want to get to the chorus of the song. But the best parts of most songs are really in the verses where the story is being told. Well, that could be a metaphor for the entire paradigm that exists now. Nobody cares about the story; they just want their chorus, or they want their their TikTok video or whatever stream they're listening to, and so forth. Yeah, I think this has been a long time coming, and I think that the causes are deeply rooted in multiple facets of the economy and technology and stuff like that. I remember when I first moved to LA, way back when, there were articles that were popping up in like the Hollywood Reporter and LA Weekly and stuff. How it used to be that the studio head, for example, in the film industry, would be concerned about the success of the franchise that he was responsible for. So whether it was Star Trek or Star Wars or Indiana Jones or whatever it was, there were sequels, and there was this whole looking forward business plan. And it got to the point where there were articles about how now it seemed to be that studio heads would be only concerned with what was going to happen on their watch, because they knew that their lifespan was going to be limited because of the turnover of personnel in those higher echelons of the industry were becoming obviously shorter lived, and that is almost a parallel to what happened to record companies in the 60s and 70s. When a record company used to sign a band, they were in for the long haul. They would invest in producers, and they wouldn't look for the quick turnaround buck on the instant success of the record. If it didn't do well, they were never happy about it, of course, but there was a long-term game plan. They would invest in the artist. They would give the artist time to grow and develop, and in more cases than not, that business plan paid off because our artistry is like it's a very organic endeavor. And like a flower, it has to be given time to grow. It has to be nurtured, and eventually you get the blossom, and you go, that's what I was waiting for. That doesn't happen anymore. So I think that you could make parallels in a lot of different aspects of life, where once upon a time there was focus on the beginning, the development, and eventually the payoff. Whereas now it's just how quick can we make how much and get it, be done with it. So I think that's probably the driving force.
True. It's like what you said about the record labels. I always associated like being on a ball team. Like you got an A&R person, a rep that found the band, and they kind of nurtured you like being on a farm team before they moved up to the majors. But when all that happens with the record labels, isn't the end game? The artist usually winds up getting screwed somehow on most labels.
Yeah, pretty much. That actually that's an excellent metaphor as well. The sports industry. I mean, that's the same kind of thing. It used to be, if a guy didn't do well right away, even their. I mean, look at the Mets. I mean, you're old enough to remember when the Mets first came out, right?
Yep.
They certainly were not. It took a lot of balls to be a Mets fan. But then '69 rolled around, and all of a sudden, wow, it was worth the wait. So I think there's a part of that. What was, you could actually, if you really want to get too analytical about all of this, you can look at language. And a phrase came along. It's been a while now, but I think that was a harbinger of what the future was going to hold. And the phrase was, "What have you done for me lately?"
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that just semantically almost defines the what the future was going to hold, which is, all right, so you did that. Who cares? What's next?
It's a crazy world we live in. Claude, anybody who listens to my show, they know you, they know your music, they know what you've been a part of. For the people that don't, because
so you have a really small audience, is what you're saying?
It's me and you really today. No. We focus on mostly the 70s and 80s. We're a classic rock and metal show, and that's all we focus on. Mm-hmm. So everybody knows. But you kind of take it back to the very beginning with you. I mean, even before the band started, when you were a kid. I mean, was the piano and keyboard something that you naturally came to, or was something that was forced upon you, or something that you really wanted to learn? How did you get hooked up with the keyboard? Because that wasn't a common instrument back then. Most people started with the piano back then, but it's not a common instrument for a lot of guys to start playing. It's a very difficult instrument, in my opinion.
So it was a piano, at least a decade before keyboards even came around. But yes, and it was forced down my throat. I mean, I was kicking and screaming. It was the least favorite part of my day. I wanted to be out playing ball with my friends, and I wasn't. I was sitting at home doing scales and practicing these different pieces and so forth and so on. And of course, when you're starting out, there's not a lot of musical satisfaction that comes with what you're doing. So it was like most kids who started playing piano. It was a very, very tedious affair. We moved to New York from Paris when I was I think five and a half, and a year later the piano showed up, and a year after that the teacher showed up, and that was pretty much my life until I was 16. So. But I mean, I was classically trained, and it didn't take long. The beauty of forcing a kid to play, even if he doesn't want to, of course, it's easy to say that looking back through the looking glass, is that when you're forced to do something and you keep doing it, chances are you're going to get better at it. And by the time you get better at it, then you could decide, well, yes, I like this, or no, I don't like this. And for me, the epiphany came when I was like everybody else. I wanted to be in a band, and my parents had reservations about that ever happening, because heaven forbid the kid should go out and meet girls and whatever. But a very, very, very good friend of mine was a drummer in a band, and I went. He invited me to his rehearsal, and at that rehearsal, it was my first time around a band actually playing outside of like a professional venue or something, and they were great. They mostly did Doors covers, and they did them to my young ear flawlessly. And it was really all about the keyboard player, a kid named Johnny Cobert, who was just phenomenal. Or he had a little Farfisa organ. He played effortlessly, flawlessly, like Ray Manzarek. He did all the bass with his left hand, and he sang the vocals as well. They were amazing. And it really bummed me out that this kid who was about my age was so freaking good. I was just like, how does he do that? I mean, it like I said, it sounded just like the record. And while I was crying in my milk about it one day, my mom asked me, what's your problem today? Because I was a cranky kid. I said, well, I've been playing now. It was probably 6 years I've been playing, 5 or 6 years, whatever it was. And and I heard this kid, and he's just so good. It bums me out that that he's that much better than me. And my mom, in a unique moment of lucidity, she said, well, why don't you find out who his teacher is? And it was like the sky opened, the sun shined down, and I'm like, what a great idea. Yeah. So Johnny was kind enough to tell me who his teacher was, a gentleman by the name of Teddy Harris, an old jazz guy. And I started studying with him, and it didn't take long before everything changed. Studying with this guy opened my eyes to what music is supposed to be. It's not a bunch of dots on a piece of paper that are there to torture you as you're forced to sit in front of it day after day instead of doing what you really want to do. I mean, he explained to me what they represent in terms of somebody having created these works of music and so forth. Of course, by this time I was a reasonably good kid, child classical player. But this guy being a jazz guy, he started teaching me a little bit about theory and taught me to listen to things differently than I had listened to them. And almost in an organic way, I had a completely different relationship with music from that point moving forward. And one of the earliest things he told me was, it's going to be interesting to see what happens to you in 10 years. And I'm like, yeah, okay. I'm glad you think it'll be interesting, because I think it's going to be a dead end road going nowhere. But almost to the calendar, 10 years later, was when I wound up in Dio. So, Ted had a great deal to do with changing my perception of how music fits into our universe, into our world, into our personal lives. And once that understanding became integrated into who I was as a kid, it was a whole different ballgame. Then it dawned on me very early on that this is really what I want to be doing. I remember I saw Zeppelin at the Garden in, I want to say 69, maybe 70, one of the earliest Zeppelin shows, and I was just in awe of the community, of the power, the majesty that came with being a band like that, and having 16,000 people in the palm of your hand. And I mean, it really, again, going back to my original comment, it really felt like a religion. And I thought, well, that's fine and dandy, but there's no way I'm ever going to be a guy sitting on stage in Madison Square Garden. And it was maybe 10, 11 years later, sure enough, there I was. So that's long and short of it. That's kind of how it all came to pass.
I can imagine. I mean, like you said, when you're on that stage in Madison Square Garden, performing in front of all those people, thinking back of when you were a kid going there, seeing bands, and saying, "Oh my God, I hated taking these piano lessons when I was so young. I didn't think it was going to go anywhere." Does that ever cross your mind when that curtain opens up and you see all those people out there for the first time, knowing that they're there to see you and your band?
Oh man, absolutely. Talk about the endorphin rush. That is the one. And fortunately, I don't know where this came from, but I always had the notion that as great as this ride is, there's no way it's going to last forever, because nothing does. And I always tried to take a couple of moments, when the intro tape was just finishing before we'd go out and start the show, to just almost in a Zen way go within myself and just absorb the energy of that anticipation, knowing that the people were there, knowing that because it was Ronnie, there was going to be yet another unbelievable show, and just savor that. Again, I hate to keep using the same words, but the majesty of that moment. So yes, it always occurred to me.
Yeah, and you just said something that's like you were saying. Nothing lasts forever. You don't know how long this ride's going to go on for. As a musician, as a professional musician, is that something that you really got to account for from the day you join a band? Saying, "It might last a day, it might last a month, it could go 30 years. I don't know, but we're going to make the most out of it. And when it ends, I can't have any regrets."
Yeah, well, actually, what you just described is pretty much a pretty good blueprint for life in general, because none of us know anything, right? It's all about the moment. Whether you're a chef in a 5-star restaurant, or you're flipping burgers at McDonald's, or you're performing surgery on life-threatened patients, nobody knows what the next day is going to bring them. So it's a pretty good idea to at least work on a philosophy that allows you to maybe not as much as we're supposed to, but at least allows a component of your attention to be focused on appreciating the moment, appreciating what life is now. Because at the end of the day, if you really do the analysis, all we ever have are those moments. And we spend so much time worrying about the future and regretting the past, and in many cases, it's at the expense of appreciating what we have at the time we have it. So, for whatever reason, I always had a little bit of philosophy floating around in my head, and it didn't hurt that I was doing something I never dreamed I'd get to do. So I think one of the real secrets is to be paying attention to what's going on, especially if it's something good. The old saying, you don't know what you have until you lose it. Well, you don't want that to apply if you can help it. You want to know what you have when you have it. You have time to regret it once it's gone, but you don't want to live in fear of what the future is going to bring, because that just undermines any real chance for happiness, right?
That's so very true. And Claude, most people here in New York will say, New York City was the scene. That's where everything was taking place within the 5 boroughs, Manhattan. But we had a great scene going on upstate New York. I mean, Ronnie came from Cortland. His cousin Rock and the Rods came from there. Billy Sheehan was upstate. There were so many things going on upstate at that time, late 70s, early 80s. And you were a part of that scene for quite some time. I mean, what was it like back then up there?
So it's funny you should bring that up, because when I decided to go up to Buffalo to go to school, Part of the incentive was that I was getting really burnt out on being in the city. I couldn't deal with living at home anymore. It was, it's the old kind of the arrogant, been there, done that kind of thing. But mostly, I just needed to get away from my folks. I needed to spread my wings and see where I was going to take myself. And honestly, I looked at the map of New York. I saw the furthest place that my scholarship would take me, and it literally from Brooklyn to Buffalo. You can't get much further apart than that. And that's why I chose Buffalo. And it turned out to be an inspired decision, because it wasn't long before actually I met Billy, and we got to be fast friends. And the thing was, the way this all went down, I was living in the dorms, and the guy who I was friends with said, "Okay, there's this great band playing at a club." And I'm like, "Yeah, I've seen some great bands. I used to go spend my weekends in the Village, with everybody. And this is Buffalo. What are you guys going to have up here? Because I'm telling you, you're going to be surprised." Okay, fine. So off we go. We walk into the club. I believe it was a club called McVan's, if I'm remembering correctly. And on the stage, on stage right, there were two double stacks of Marshalls, so 4 Marshall cabinets, 2 heads. There was a big drum riser with a huge chrome set of John Bonham inspired chrome Ludwig drums. And on stage left, there were 3 SVT bass amps, which were like the standard workhorse bass amp of the day. And I walked in, and I vividly remember my first thought was, "Wow, these guys' parents must have a lot of money." and then Tallis walked out on stage, looking like they were playing at the Budokan or something, platforms and outfits and the whole thing. And I'm like, all right, how good are these guys going to be? And they just, I felt like I don't know if you're old enough to remember this, but there used to be an ad for JBL, or maybe it was Max Tape, but it's a guy sitting in a chair
yeah,
in front of the speaker with his hair. They started playing, and to this day, I'm pretty sure that's the best band I've ever seen, man. They just were insane. They were just so freaking good. And then all of a sudden, Billy starts taking off on his style of playing, which I had never seen before. Even though Billy freely admits that he kind of based his style on Timmy Bogart from The Fudge, which is another Brooklyn band. But by the way, not only a Brooklyn band, but Vinny and Carmine lived like maybe 2 miles from where I grew up, and we never met in Brooklyn when we lived there together. It wasn't until we were out in L.A. that we all became friends. But anyway, after seeing the show, I approached Billy. I said, "Man, I got to tell you, I've never seen anybody do anything like this on bass before." And he was very humble and very kind. And we got to be friends. We started hanging out, and we ended up playing together pretty regularly. Just casually, he'd come up to the house I was living in off campus and bring his bass, and I had my Hammond at the time, and we would do box 2 and 3 part invention classical stuff. And you'd think the keyboard player would get to do 2 of the parts and Billy would do the third, but no, Billy would do 2 of the parts. And, you just do the one. I'm like, come on, man, I got 2 heads, but yes, the music scene in Buffalo, and as I learned, not only Buffalo. So there was a band called. No, you're in the city. So do you remember Black Sheep by any chance?
Sure, I do. Yeah.
Yeah. So Black Sheep, those guys were from Rochester, which was a short hour drive away. Lou Grammatico, better known as Lou Graham. There were tons of bands that had some really, really great players in them. So I think there's a little bit of I don't know if chauvinism is the right word, but whatever town you live in, you think you got the best ball team, you think you got the best music, you think you got the best everything. But every town kind of has that same perception, and Buffalo was no exception. And honestly, I can't remember ever going to see a band in Buffalo that, all right, maybe they weren't all as good as Billy's band Tallis, but I don't remember seeing any bands that sucked. I really don't.
It was definitely a great time for music in general, but from there, I mean, now you take your act out to L.A. because I guess really that's where everything was kind of happening at that time.
Yep.
And was it did Joe go with you out there? Did you run into Joe out there? Because you guys sort of got Rough Cut going.
So when you're talking about Joe, you're referring to Joe Cristofanelli?
The finale, yeah.
Wow. So you know Joe. Do you know Joe personally?
Not personally, but I know that some of the bands he was in.
Yeah, you should. We should talk about putting you two guys in touch. Yeah, Joe meeting Joe was an amazing thing. Well, I should add here that I'm actually working on an autobiography, And the working title for the book was going to be My Best Friends Have Always Been Drummers, because they kind of always had been. And that kid who took me to his band's rehearsal, that was where they did the Doors covers where I met Johnny Colbert, he was a drummer. It was a band called Lost Horizon. Then I became friends with an unbelievably talented drummer in Buffalo, a guy named Pete O'Donnell, and we were jamming and stuff. And he was, I know this really good bass player, so he introduced me to Joe. At least that's how I remember it. It might have been the other way around. Joe introduced me to Pete, but I'm not sure. In any case, Joe and I just hit it off right away. We became really, really fast friends. And P.S. Joe Cristofanelli, do I have to tell you how good a cook his mom was?
You may as well. Hey, come on, you're Italian. You know you're going to be a good cook.
I'm telling you, man. I walked into his house. And Buffalo, there's like snow everywhere up to the up to the tops of cars and stuff. And the first time I went out to his, we had, I don't even know if we'd met at a studio or if we had gone to Pete's house, but the first time I went to Joe's house, I parked on the street and I go down the driveway to the side door because nobody uses front doors, right? And I opened the door and this smell just wafted over me I used to go to Mama Leone's in New York, and there was a place in Brooklyn called Casa d'Oro, which was House of Gold, of course, which was a great, great Italian restaurant in Brooklyn. Nothing compared to the scents that were emanating from Mary's kitchen. Wow. It was just like, forget music. I just wanted to be there for the food. It was just insane. And of course, with that kind of culinary excellence comes the big-hearted woman who's behind the stove. And Joe's mom was just, the Earth Mother of Earth Mothers. She was just so welcoming. Before I even had my coat off, sit down, you're going to eat something. Like, no, I'm not. Just sit down, take off your coat, have some sauce, and check out. And Joe's like, don't argue with her. Just try this bread. And she used to make this bread, this sesame bread that was, oh my God, marron, as they used to say. Yep. Just the best ever. So maybe my attraction to Joe had something to do with how well I ate at his mom's house. But Joe and I got to be really fast friends, and when we decided that, I had told him that my plan was to eventually go to California. And he went, maybe we should go together. And we talked about it, and we actually ended up playing in a cover band for a while, to a really silly cover band, just to raise the funds to have pocket money to gas and breakdowns and whatever else. And Joe and I and a friend of Joe's kid brother, a guy named Tom Kelleher, did the trip with us, and the three of us drove cross country. Every day was laced with another problem, another breakdown, another setback. But, we made the trip. We got out here. Tom, bless his heart, he had a job waiting for him at Fender Guitars down in Anaheim. And then Joe and I drove from Anaheim up to L.A., and, we found a place to stay. And, so it took a little while before, we found our footing. But I think within a year or two, there was a band called Magic that we were in together.
That's right. That was before Rough Cut.
Yes, that was right. That was before Rough Cut. And then, of course, when Rough Cut came along, and that was the next brick in the wall, if you will. And actually, Rough Cut had as I'm sure you and perhaps many of your listeners know, had the good fortune to fall under the attention of Wendy Dio, and she became our manager. And this is where the story kind of got interesting, because suddenly now. And actually, Rough Cut in its original incarnation, not to say anything about the following ones, but the band that we were originally was not reflected in the following incarnations. The original band, Jake Ely was playing guitar, Joe was playing bass, Paul Shortino, of course, singing, myself on keyboards, and we were very, very like-minded. We were very, very much about the songs. I think if you look hard enough, you could probably find on YouTube a couple of tracks. There's a track called A Little Kindness and another track called
Used and Abused?
Used and Abused.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are the two. Those were our originals that were slated to get recorded on, I think it was a record called LA's Best Unsigned Bands. Fortunately, by the time the possibility of having our work showcased on that record, along with other local bands, Wendy was already well ensconced in the management seat, and she persuaded Ronnie to come along and produce the tracks for us, which turned out to be a very prophetic experience because it was my first time in the studio with Ronnie producing. So anybody who's ever been in a studio or knows even anything about it, the musicians and the producer develop, hopefully, a very synergistic relationship. So Ronnie and I really got to know each other well. But even before that, before Wendy decided that she would take on the band, we did a showcase for her and her business partner, a woman by the name of Patty Stein, the wife of keyboard player extraordinaire Mark Stein from Vanilla Fudge days. Funny how it all leads back to Brooklyn, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we rented a studio at SIR, and we had our gear set up, and we were pretty cocky. We were pretty arrogant. We'd been doing what we were doing a long time, so we weren't really nervous about it. But so we were just running through the tunes. The door opens, and in walks Wendy, and unmistakable in her platinum hair, and behind her Patty Stein with beautiful long locks down to her butt, and behind her in walks Ronnie, which I don't think any of us in the band expected. So that was kind of like, whoa, that's freaking Ronnie James Dio over there. Holy crap. And behind him, which took an extra notch off of my shaking knees, was Mark Stein.
Wow.
Who, incredible Hammond player. So they all walk in, and we finish our song, and we stop playing, and Wendy's like, hello, guys, and Ronnie gets up off the couch, and he comes up to the stage, and he comes right up to me, and he shakes my hand. He goes, hi, I'm Ronnie. Yeah, no kidding. He goes, this is interesting rig. We were talking about, and he was talking to me. I think the second thing or third thing he said was, yeah, we both went to the same school. I guess we're like alumni. I'm like, well, yeah, because I don't know if you know, Ronnie was a student at UB as well.
Yes, yeah. Pharmacy, yeah.
Yeah. So, and then he goes over and he says hi to Paul, and then he meets Jake, and instantly it felt like we had leapt beyond the shackles of being another unknown band, and here we are now. We're all friends with Ronnie. I mean, that honestly on that day that would have been enough. I mean, we were all just elated beyond words, and we played. I don't know how many songs we played, but quite a few, and Ronnie had to leave. I think he had to go into the record plant. He was doing something with, I'm guessing, Sabbath at the time. Yeah, of course. And Wendy walked out with him, and she came back and she goes, "Well, guys, Ronnie liked you, so yes, I'll take you under my wing." And that was it. Suddenly we had management. And within a couple of months, this unsigned LA's unsigned artist thing came up, and Wendy informed us that she had convinced Ronnie to go into the studio with us and produce whatever songs we were going to record, the aforementioned Used and Abused and A Little Kindness. And that was just an experience I can't even begin to describe. To not only be friends with the guy or to at least have a casual relationship with him, but to have his hands on the sliders for the music that we were trying to create. It was almost hand of God kind of thing, And as it turns out, and I didn't even realize this at the time, it was decades later when Angelo Arcuri, another name that should be familiar to you and your listeners, I'm guessing, yes?
Yeah.
Angelo, the gentleman who engineered all of the Dio records, or at least most of the Dio records. I guess there was a hole in the chronology somewhere. But he was also he also did live sound for Sabbath, and which is how. All right, so just in case people don't know, the long and short story: Angelo and Vinny Appice were best friends. When Vinny got the gig to join Sabbath, he needed a roadie. Angelo was working at the record plant in New York at the time, but he took a sabbatical so he could go on the road with his good buddy. I mean, who wouldn't? You go on the road with Black Sabbath? Yeah, I think that probably trumps any other option. So, and then the way I remember the story, their sound guy had food poisoning or something, and Angelo was still humping drums for Vinny, and Ronnie remembered that he had worked at the record plant. He goes, "Well, you worked in the studio," and Angelo was like, "Yeah, but I just I was like a third engineer. I didn't really and Ronnie's like, "That's fine. You're doing it." By this time, he had listened to the set often enough, and clearly he knew Vinny's drums well because he'd been Vinny's best friend since childhood, and his roadie, so he knew how all the mics were positioned and so forth. And the way the story goes, Sabbath sounded better live when Angelo mixed them than they had ever sounded before. And it was discovered that, well, this guy has a great pair of ears. So when Ronnie left Sabbath to start the Dio project, of course, Angelo went with him. And the plan was that Angelo would engineer and Ronnie would produce. But the first time they actually were in the studio together, if you will, testing their plan to work together, was when they were in the studio with Rough Cut doing those two songs for us. And clearly the chemistry worked, because this I don't even want to do the math as to how many years ago that was, but if you listen to those tracks now, they still sound great.
Absolutely.
I mean, they did an amazing job. So that was a match made in heaven. Ronnie was really had foresight when he coaxed Angelo into getting behind the console, both live and then again in the studio. And of course, the other secret ingredient, the secret sauce that nobody really ever figured out, although I don't know why, because it seems pretty obvious to me. One of the biggest accolades that we ever got as a band in Dio was how much we sounded like the record. And it's, everybody always wants to take credit when you never like anybody as much as somebody who's complimenting you on something that you didn't know you did. But sure, okay, it's because we're so great, But in truth, the reason we sounded so much like the record, Ronnie was a great taskmaster. He didn't settle for second. In fact, his word, second best, isn't. We had the same guy behind the console when we played live as we had in the studio when we were recording. So not only did he know where all the different parts were, not only did he know how everything was supposed to sound, but more importantly, he knew what you weren't supposed to hear at different parts. For example, during a guitar, it's the most obvious example, during a guitar solo, I mean, pretty much any sound guy is going to know you move up the sound of the guitar, the volume, so the solo becomes louder. But things like the placement of the drums across the stereo field. I mean, he had studio sensibilities and applied them to live shows, which I had seen that in a few in the early days of going to see Genesis, for example. They really sounded like their record as well. That was just mind blowing. But it was for the same reason. I don't know if their live guy was the same guy who was in the studio with them, but certainly whoever did their sound live made a study of how the soundscape was supposed to be painted, and that's something in the rock world I don't think really happened in the earliest days anyway. So I for one credit Angelo completely with making us sound live as good as we did.
That's very true. There's that continuous flow from, studio to live, so it does kind of help out that he's familiar with the band and the music. And I think if more bands kind of work that way, it'd be a much better sounding band live.
Absolutely. Well, the other thing, too, is, and this helped, and some bands can't make this claim, we did sound exactly like we sounded in the studio. There was nothing. Ronnie absolutely eschewed any possibilities of using studio tricks to do things that we couldn't do live. He goes, well, what are we going to do live? And, of course, me, the idiot, I'm like, I could sample it. And the look I got would freeze ice. It was just like, all right, okay, I get it. We're not cheating. Okay, fair enough. But that was important to him. I mean, Ronnie was for starters, he was a brilliant artist, but he was an old school artist. The whole notion of using technology to make you sound like something you weren't, that really was under his skin.
That's true.
So there was no. I mean, even I did do sampling, full disclosure, but most of the samples I did were things like explosions, like sound effects that in venues where, because of the fire marshal, we couldn't use pyro or whatever. We didn't have to sacrifice the impact of the show because I could literally emulate the sound of the explosion using my sampler. But as far as cheating with harmonies or any of that kind of stuff, never at all.
It shouldn't be that way. But I think, I could have sworn not long ago, Vinny Appice did an interview. He said Ronnie used some pre-recorded vocals here and there. I don't know if I read that right. I'm not sure. He was talking about other people that were doing it. I think he mentioned Ronnie, but I don't see that actually ever happening.
That if that happened, it was after I was well out of the purview of the band.
Yeah.
But I find that really hard to believe. The last, what? I don't think that's true. The last time I saw Vinny and Ronnie live together was in July of 2009. They played the Greek Theater here in L.A. And my good buddy Jay and I were fortunate enough that we were able to get laminates, so we were watching the show from the side of the stage, which was just incredible, as you might imagine, especially with Brian May standing behind us. I mean, how cool is that, right? I don't know if you know, but Brian May and Tony Iommi are best friends. They were school chums in secondary school or something.
Oh, that I don't know.
But I saw Ronnie's lips move, and I know what I heard, and it was him. It was all him.
I'm sure. No, I apologize. He was talking about Black Sabbath when they did the reunion, and he was singing the song "I." That's what he was talking about. Not with your band, with the Dio band, but with Black Sabbath. That's what he was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And that was many years later, and it was the chorus he said.
Right. That sounds. I mean, you know, even at that though, at least it was all him, right? It wasn't any electronically enhanced whatever. Like for example, I'm assuming you've seen your share of Dio shows.
Oh, I have quite a few,
Yeah.
probably more than 2 dozen.
So remember the crystal ball that was underneath the drum riser?
Yep.
Greetings, my friend. So all of that was clearly that was a recording. He didn't read the line every single show.
Sure.
Because there was processing on the voice to give it that very deep and mysterious kind of sound. So things like that were pre-recorded. But that's not the same as, well, bands that I won't mention who actually run a stream of audio of vocals that are not actually being produced on the stage. You know, to create the illusion that people are singing when they're not.
There's a lot of bands doing that today, more than you could imagine.
Well, believe me, I can't imagine. And even some bands that I like, I won't share this with your listeners because if I were in that band, I wouldn't want it shared either. But sometimes on bands that are really vocally eloquent, it's tricky to be able to do live what you can do in the studio, especially if the harmonies are very, very precise, and mostly if they're a cappella. There's very, very little room for fudging. So some bands, like I said, who will remain nameless, I know had bits that were sampled and they triggered them live. But at least again, it was their voices, you know. And on any given night, I'm pretty sure I think that was done for the benefit of the fans more than anything else, because you wouldn't want to cut out a song because you were worried that somebody might have a sore throat or an itchy, whatever, and then suddenly you can't do the harmonies, which are a significant part of the track. So you have the insurance of having your own vocals pre-recorded that you could play. But it's one thing to add bits and pieces within a song, like you said, harmonies, as opposed to somebody's lead vocal that was pre-recorded because the guy can't sing on stage. And that happens in many, many cases.
There's a lot, but take out the fact that you're a musician, a songwriter, somebody that's up on stage playing all the time, and just go to like you being a fan. Now, me as a fan, when I go to see a band live, I don't care if it sounds like the record. I know that the records are going to sound one way because they're produced in the studio. There's a lot of things added to them, and a lot of things can't be recreated live. And you could always fix things in the studio to make it sound better. But when I go to see a band live, I want to see the band live. I don't like Iron Maiden. When they record live records, they leave a lot of the mistakes and the flubs in there. They don't even take them out because that's part of playing live. That's the fun of it. That's the thrill of it. So as a fan of music, do you prefer to go to a show and see the band make all those little errors and those mistakes and those little flubs, or would you prefer to hear it exactly like the record?
It depends on the band.
Yeah.
But I'm as a musician, I mean, look, nobody's perfect, and if you are perfect, you're not perfect all the time. So I don't think that mistakes are the crime that people make them out to be. Some of the best ideas I've ever had were the result of mistakes that I'd made, and I'm like, well, that doesn't suck though. I should save that for something else. I mean, making mistakes is part of being human. And if you get 5 guys together, that's 5 humans who are prone to possibly making, again, mistakes, if you want to call them that. So I don't really put a lot of stock in the band sounding exactly like the record. But in our case, I should clarify, even though we sounded like the record, meaning the audio content, the how do I describe this? The actual sounds themselves,
yeah,
and the positioning of the mix and all of that. The songs as we played them live were very rarely the same as they were on the record. In fact, Ronnie was kind of a big fan of throwing in little what do they call them in the film industry? There's a word for this, and I'm not going to be able to think of it, I'm sure. No, it's like little inside joke kinds of things that they'll put in a movie.
Easter eggs.
That's it.
Easter eggs.
Thank
Yeah,
you, sir.
when you said little inside things, I got it.
Yep. Nicely done. Nicely done. So Ronnie would do that, and a lot of times, for example, we would I can't remember what the organizations were, but we would segue like Holy Diver into Last in Line into All the Fools Sailed Away, and then come back to Holy Diver at the end. Those kinds of collages of different songs, which clearly nobody ever heard on a record. So in that respect, it's a live show. It's kind of done on the fly. And surely most solos were never done exactly as they are on the record. I'm sure Viv and Craig did did the part that they thought guitar players would be looking for as they performed their solos, as I did with when I started doing keyboard solos as well. But by and large, music is a very fluid art. I think it's the let's call them imperfections that give it real character. Yeah.
I couldn't agree
Ronnie
more.
would do things, he would sing some bits that were different, and like for example, so you remember "And a Little White Light Shine Down on Me," and it was just myself and Ronnie singing that in what it was a Sabbath tune. It's Heaven and Hell, right?
Heaven and Hell, yeah.
Yeah. So on occasion, he would change the melody a little bit, whether he did it on purpose or accidentally, I don't know, but when he did, I was as tuned as a person can be to someone else, and I would modify the background chords that I was playing against his vocal, and every so often he'd turn around and he'd give me like a thumbs up and a wink that I caught it, as if I'd still have a gig if I didn't. But anyway, and we would on a couple of occasions I remember he really went outside a little bit, and he gave. Well, I guess he gave me the opportunity to just kind of like play freely with him. Now, he did that a lot with the guitar players. They would trade, he'd sing a line and Craig would mimic the line on guitar, and they would trade off back and forth like that. He did that with Richie as well and with Tony. But since I didn't have any isolated parts to do with Ronnie other than the little white light bit, on a couple of occasions he would sing something differently, and I would play along, and that oh man, that was the coolest thing ever, because that was like sitting in my room at home and just jamming with a friend. It was like the hell with the 16,000 people who were out there. This is just us, like enjoying ourselves.
That's so cool. Claude, kind of going back to Rough Cut a little bit, when you talk about recording that demo and, Wendy's representing you now, Ronnie's there producing it, a couple of guys unknown to everybody else at that point in time, Paul Shortino, what a great singer, especially today, he's with King Cobra, he did a Quiet Riot, he's got Rough Cut going, Jakey Lee went on to Ozzy, and other stuff, Badlands. I mean, when you think about everything you guys did back then, I mean, this is like what the music industry is about. You say to yourselves, how did this band not make it? We had the songs, we had the looks, we had the people representing us, we had Ronnie involved in it, and it just didn't happen. And that's the sad part about music. But years later, Jakey wound up with Ozzy, you were in Ronnie's band, and, things always kind of work out in the end with different reasons. But you have to say so, how did we not make it as Rough Cut?
Well, are you a fan of motor racing by any chance?
No, not really.
Nah. Well, I can tell you that nobody sponsors like an IndyCar team or a NASCAR team or a Le Mans race team with the intention of not winning the race.
True.
But only one person can win. Now, of course, that might be a little broad of a brush to paint this metaphor with. But the thing is, there are so many things involved in reaching that finish line that we call success. More often than not, it doesn't have to do with the qualifications or the merit of the people who are trying to achieve it. As often as not, it has to do with just blind luck. I can't think of who it is, but somebody notable had a really good record that was released on the day that George Bush Sr. Took military action in the Mideast. And that was the only thing anybody was focused on for a month. And as a result, that record just went away. I can't remember who. I promise you, I used to know who it was, but I don't anymore. but things like that happen. There's just no accounting for that. I think that's the serendipitous nature of life in general. That you do the best you can do, and you prepare as best you can. But at 11:59 and 59 seconds, the thing that's going to make the difference at midnight is how the stars are aligned, how the planets are aligned, what is actually happening at that moment in time. Maybe the difference between success and failure is the guy who should have heard the band didn't get to because he had a cold and he couldn't go to the club that night. Somebody else went and they didn't like the band. It could be literally an infinite number of possible things make the difference between what we call success and failure. Which is why I try to advise people that you really shouldn't think of anything artistic as a competitive sport, because it's not. Just because somebody doesn't enjoy the success that somebody else does, 99.5% of the time, that has no reflection on the actual merit of the creation. It has to do with countless other things.
True. Well, you know what? That meeting obviously is what led you to joining Ronnie's band. By that time, Holy Diver was already out, and even though Ronnie had the reputation from Rainbow and Black Sabbath, you never know if it's going to parlay into the next band. You don't know if it's going to take off. It doesn't always work that way, but they made it with Holy Diver, and the band became well known. You joined the band right after that, and for most of the 80s, at least 87, 88, when you left the band, it couldn't have been any better musically, I don't think.
I couldn't agree more. Ronnie was the most capable captain of a ship I could ever have imagined. Not only did he have the vision, not only did he have the talent, not only did he have the work ethic, but he had the personality where I've been in the studio with at least hundreds of different producers, and they all claim to know what they want, and in some cases maybe they do, but as often as not, their ability to get that out of you. Yeah, no, not really. Actually, do you know who Leland Sklar is by any chance?
No, I don't. The name don't sound familiar.
Leland Sklar is probably the most widely recorded bass player in history. And when I describe him to you, you'll know exactly who he is. He's a tall guy, very, very long gray hair, very thin on top, long white beard. And
Yep.
He played in the Phil Collins videos.
Yeah.
And he played the Annie Lennox videos. And he's played with I think, if I'm not mistaken, he played with like Sinatra, and he's the guy. And I just saw a video that he posted either it was on Facebook or YouTube or something, and he has one of his God knows how many basses, and he goes, well, this is the bass I've used probably on more records and whatever. He's used to talking about the instrument, and he goes, people always ask me about this little toggle switch here, and there was a little switch down by where the four knobs are for volume and so forth. And he flicks it back and forth. And he goes, this is what I call my producer switch. So when I go into the studio and if I play a part and the producer speaks back to me over the talkback and he says, well, Leland, that was really good, but could you make it sound a little bit? And then he'll use some adjective. And I just talk back to him. I go, yeah, no problem. I'll take care of that. I flick the switch and I'll play the part with my hand in a slightly different position. And he'll talk back after the take. So that was perfect. Whatever you did, that was it. And by the way, the switch isn't connected to anything. So that just in a nutshell, that's kind of like the paradigm for producers. Ronnie, on the other hand, he got shit out of me, excuse my French, that I never would have believed I was capable of doing. Ronnie and I together, all due respect, mostly Ronnie, he knew what he wanted in keyboards for the Dio records. But I was, I've been playing a long time. I thought I was pretty good. I was pretty sure I could do whatever he wanted me to. But the trick was he couldn't tell me what it was because it only existed in his mind as an abstract. He knew how he wanted to feel when the right keyboard part would be created and played and performed and have the right sound ascribed to it and all of that. And it took a lot of patience. It took a lot of time. But the brilliant man that Ronnie was, he was able to guide me down this invisible path to find what he didn't know he was looking for. If you follow my train of thought there.
Sure, yeah.
And that is a priceless quality in a producer. And for Ronnie to be producing his own vision, it made it that much more of a fulfilling opportunity. because he knew what he wanted, and he had the patience, he had the time, he had the success and the track record that he didn't have some record company breathing down his neck, save for the desire for Warner Brothers wanting another Rainbow in the Dark, to just mold us all into who he wanted us to be. Some of the less inspired of us might think that they did it by themselves, but I know better. I mean, yeah, they were my hands, they were my fingers, they were my lessons and studies and all that allowed me to play the part. But it was Ronnie that, in his own unique way, was able to create within me. Well, of course, it didn't hurt that I wanted, I wanted nothing more than to please him in the studio and give him, what he wanted, and thereby raise my own stock, being the guy. Yeah, Ronnie likes what I did. But he was able to guide me through this nebulous path in a way that to this day I really don't understand, other than to say, just massive amounts of patience. We would try things, at 5 o'clock in the morning after we'd been in the studio for 8 hours, and just keep, I'll try something else. Try something. There's a part in in the track One Night in the City.
Yeah.
You know the song? Yeah.
Yep.
It was missing something, right? Ron said, I don't know. The middle eight just doesn't pop like I'd want it to. I'm like, okay, so how about some strings? He goes, no. Well, what do you want? And it's usually, and he'd give me the look by this point, because I should know that he doesn't know what he wants. Okay, fair enough. So I said, well, maybe a moving part rather than just a static one. So I started playing the little triplet part that goes over the middle eight. Do you know the part to which I'm referring?
Yes, absolutely.
The doodle doodle doodle.
Yep.
Yeah. So I started playing that, and he had his feet up on the console, and he sat down. and He goes, yeah. That's cool. But I don't know about the sound. I'm like, yeah, big surprise. I didn't think you'd like the sound. So we started going through, and I found some sounds which I thought were great. And he's like, nah. I'm like, really? Oh, okay. And in my mind, I'm like, making a mental note. Go back to this one, much like Leon Sklar's switch that isn't connected to anything, because maybe the second time he hears it, he'll say, that's it. And far be it, I wouldn't say, yeah, you heard that one before. I'm not that dumb. So anyway, by the end, I was just going numerically through all the sounds that I had programmed into my synthesizer, and I came across one, and it was I think the little window on the keyboard said MBA, and I didn't remember what that was a code for, so I just played it, and it was short for marimba, and I played it. Oh no, screw that, and I went, oh, and Ron said, whoa, wait, what? Screw what? I'm like, yeah, no, this is a freaking marimba sound. He goes, try it. I'm like, really? Try it. Okay. So I played the marimba sound, and that's the sound that's on the record.
That's amazing. When you go back to the Holy Diver record, I mean, Rainbow in the Dog, one of the most memorable keyboard parts, I think, in any song ever. I mean, but Ronnie and I think Jimmy kind of handled the keyboards there. When you came into the band for the second record, for The Last in Line, I mean, the keyboards really became more of a dominant factor in the music and the following records after that. Was that mostly because of your influence on what you wanted to put into these songs?
Yeah, I'd love to answer in the affirmative, but I'm guessing, sadly, you never had a chance to interview Ronnie?
No, I only got to speak to him for 2 seconds in the studio when I had Rudy Sarzo on the show one time.
Look, like I said, I brought my A game to the table, but Ronnie was the chef. Ronnie was the one. I mean, I presented him with options, as I just described in the One Night in the City part. But for the most part, let's put it this way: nothing ended up on a record that didn't pass Ronnie's critical affirmation, if you will. He listened to things with ears that I perhaps can't even imagine, to make sure that it was exactly what he wanted it to sound like. There were things when we redid Rainbow in the Dark for a single at some point. We had to go in the studio in England for some reason, and we redid it. And I got to finally play the famous 9-note riff that everybody knows. And you'd think playing something that was already recorded, it wouldn't take very long at all. Nope. Ronnie didn't like the sounds, and I had the original. It was an original Yamaha keyboard of his that we had in the studio that Jimmy had played on the Holy Diver sessions, and I had the exact same thing, playing the exact same notes. He's like, no, that's. I'm like, Ronnie, it's the same. He goes, well, it's a different studio, and it doesn't sound right to me. So we spent, I don't know, a few hours in an afternoon going through like 6 different keyboards, putting different sounds in tandem to create what became that riff on either the. I don't know if it was only for radio release or if it was for It was some special release of Rainbow in the Dark. I don't remember what the details were, but even something that should have been just almost automatic in terms of recreating, Ronnie still took the time and afforded the critical listening of wanting to evaluate how it fit into the track before he approved of it. So, yes, on the one hand, the keyboards became more prominent because I showed up, I guess. But what the keyboards provided, I mean, I'd be lying if I told you that when we went into the studio, I knew exactly what I was going to do, because I had no clue. Yeah. I had no clue what Ronnie had in mind. I knew I'd be able to play whatever it was going to be, but it turns out that after all those years of practice and study and all the rest of it, the playing is the easy shit. That's not the tough part at all. The tough part is the creative part, and that in and of itself was another lesson. I've always heard, of seasoned musicians say, it's always about the song, man. You got to live for the song. You're the slave to the song. The song is the master. The song will tell you what it wants, where it should be, and blah 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 blah. And I'm like, yeah, okay, fine, whatever. I'm going back to practice. And then suddenly, one day, after God knows how many sessions in the studio with Ronnie and other producers, it dawned on me that that's absolutely right. The song knows what it wants. It's like another metaphor that they tell sculptors that the sculpture is already within the block of rock. Mm-hmm. It's up to you to chisel away the parts that don't belong there. So in a very loose metaphorical way, that's the same thing with finding what works in a song and finding what doesn't. It's a very tricky bit, and most of the credit for that lies within the mind of the songwriter, the person who knows what it is they're trying to create. It isn't about what the listener expects to hear. I mean, one hopes that the listener likes what you end up with, but one of the biggest mistakes in songwriting, or for that matter in any artistic pursuit, is trying to create something based on what you think the audience wants to hear. I mean, that is to music or art what McDonald's is to cuisine. Yeah, people are going to eat hamburgers. Let's just shovel them some hamburgers. You don't want your art to be like McDonald's.
True. And one thing that's always been said about Ronnie, he said it himself, that he was very demanding, a taskmaster when it came to the music. Was Ronnie the same way with the business end of it, or was that all up to Wendy to handle? Because we all know the story, a couple of years later, him and Vinny have the falling out, Vinny wanted more money, and blah, blah, blah. Everybody knows the story by now of what happened. And then,
are you talking about Vinny or Vivian?
I'm sorry, Vivian Campbell first. Vinny came years later.
Well, there was part of that story would apply to Vinny, too. I just wanted to know.
Yeah, years later, he had it out, too, I guess, when he had enough. Yeah. Like around the same time as when you left.
Yep.
But
so you're asking me if
was it Wendy that was really was it Wendy that was kind of the driving force in splitting up that lineup with Vivian Campbell then with you guys later on, or was it just Ronnie at that time? Because nobody ever wants anything bad about Ronnie, and nobody has to. But I'm just saying, who was the person really behind the business decision on who goes and stays, or I'm leaving because I can't deal with what's going on anymore because of Wendy or because of Ronnie?
When it came to Viv was a very unique situation. First of all, because it was on his shoulders that the success of Holy Diver was largely built. I mean, yes, of course it was Ronnie, but next in line to contributions to that record has to be Viv. I mean, yes, Vinny built the fucking brick shithouse of a castle with the rhythmic part, and Jimmy was right there being, who Jimmy always has been. But the songs themselves, the structures, Viv came up with a great deal of that. So to minimize his importance to the band as has become trendy, I don't think that's merited. That being said, somewhere along the line, I think Viv lost. I don't know if it was his interest in the band or he was really fed up with how badly he was being treated, as well as Jimmy and Vinny. I mean, I was kind of low man on a totem pole anyway, so I mean, I went in eyes opened to what was in store for me, and I did it because I'd been a fan of Ronnie, excuse me, since forever. And as an aside, I remember May 17th, 76, my birthday, was the day that Rainbow Rising came out. And I was a student at UB at the time. I went across the street to Record Runner or whatever the record store was. I bought the album, and I went down Bailey Avenue to my old apartment that I was renting. And another Joey, another Italian Joey, actually, Joey Belfiore, who was pretty much the reason that I got into rock anyway. You know, we sat there and we set up the stereo, we put the record on, and we were a little bummed because, you know, Ronnie was basically responsible for breaking up, you know, our group, which was Deep Purple. And then we listened to Rising, and it was like, holy crap, where did this come from? But anyway, getting back to Viv, he seemed to be coming on the Holy Diver, well, not even Holy Diver, on the Sacred Heart tour, a little disillusioned. I think based on what I know to be true of the promises that were made initially, the fact that they weren't fulfilled. I mean, they bothered everybody, of course, myself included. But Viv came from a different place. I mean, maybe it was just because he wasn't another cookie cutter LA musician. But it bothered him that promises were made that weren't fulfilled.
Yeah.
And as he had every right for them that they should have. Now I knowing Ronnie as I do, I don't think Ronnie would intentionally ever go back on his word. That's not who he was. In our personal relationship, Ronnie was the most trustworthy, generous, forgiving, sweet friend I could ever hope to have. He was just amazing. I tell you some stories, but I'll end up getting choked up, which I don't want to do. No. Seriously, absolutely seriously. However, it will be in the book, so be sure to check that out.
I absolutely will.
But in business, Ronnie was, now let's do it the easy way. Talk about the taskmaster part. He was a dick. He knew what he wanted, and he would not be happy if he wasn't getting it, because he would hold himself to a standard at least as high, if not higher, than he held the rest of us. So if somebody wasn't rising to the challenge, now I'm not talking about somebody having difficulty with a part or whatever, but if somebody wasn't present, if somebody, I'm not going to point fingers or make suggestions as to who I'm referring, but he what's the expression? He didn't tolerate fools. No, that's not he didn't suffer fools.
Yeah.
And whenever that scenario would present itself, which on occasion it did. I mean, we worked really hard. We worked really long hours. Sometimes, for justified or unjustified reasons, people got sloppy. People lost focus. He was as tired as the rest of us and a good bit older, and he was still there. So what's your excuse? He was not, he was treated, I mean, he treated us, I assume, actually he talks about this a little bit in his biography, The Rainbow and the Dark book,
yeah.
About the way he was treated by Richie. I think it's maybe it's a little bit like abused children. What is it? Children of abused parents become abusive parents. I mean, not to put that strong of a
no, but I know what you're saying. He learned from who taught him the lesson.
He was demanding. He knew what he wanted, and if there wasn't a good explanation as to why he wasn't getting it, his patience grew thin very quickly. That said, if there was a good reason, like you're having trouble with the part, or I got to whatever, then he's he's your buddy, he's your friend. He's like, well, take a half hour, rest your hands, soak your hand, whatever, and then come back and we'll do it then, or come back tomorrow and we'll do it, whatever it might be. But with that, by the way, I have to add, as demanding as he was, when you met his demands, better still, when you surprised him by meeting his demands, there was no happier camper. He was just so willing to lash out with accolades and compliments and support. And the case I'm thinking of is when I recorded the keyboard solo in All the Fools Sail Away. As you might imagine, that was a daunting prospect to do the first ever keyboard solo on a Dio record. What do you want? He goes, I don't know, dazzle me. Sure, that can't be too hard. And I worked for months on how I would put it together, what I would do. The aforementioned Joey Belfiore was my roommate at the time, and I've known this kid since I was like 12, so he knew my mom and he knew what I went through practicing piano every day and how he couldn't come over until after I'd had my 2 hours of practice and stuff, and how my mom wanted to see his hands to make sure he washed them before he came in the apartment, stuff like that. So we've been lifelong friends, and he was living with me at the time in an apartment in Hollywood, and I'd be working on the solo, and he'd wake up, he'd come out of his room, he goes, you know that sucks, right? I'm like, come on, man, I've been working. He goes, I'm telling you, man, that ain't it. And this went on day after day, week after week, and then on one particular day, I think I had come up with the intro part. He comes out, he goes, what was that? I'm like, I don't know, I'm thinking of starting with that. He goes, yeah, that, but you got to do it faster, you got to do it cleaner. I'm like, dude, I just wrote the frickin' line. Give me a second to figure out what I just played.
Yeah.
So bit by bit, my buddy Joey, who I love to death, I can't tell you how important his influence was in me having a career to begin with, and then being a successful one as well. When I got the nod of approval from Joey, I was pretty confident that, yeah, this probably isn't too bad. So then came the task of coming up with a sound that would be worthy of a Dio record, because, you know, Ronnie, again, having had the background of having played with Tony and Richie, the sound was just massive. And for, you know, a little wimpy electronic keyboard to have to cut through, it's got to have some balls. It can't just be, you know, and he didn't want a Hammond because that was too Deep Purple. It had to be something different. So I spent a good deal of time working with Yamaha and some of their programmers and coming up with different sounds that I could daisy chain together, which really gave it almost the vision that I had in my mind was a bunch of musical notes, arm in arm, in armor, walking down a field of battle. That's
Wow.
what I wanted to create for the sound. And I had what I thought was going to work. The day came. We finished in the studio one night, and Ronnie's like, all right, you guys stay home tomorrow. We're just going to do the keyboard solo. I'm like, what, tomorrow? He goes, yeah, didn't you hear me? I'm like, well, yeah, but I thought, what, is tomorrow a problem? No. I just thought that I'd have, you know, more warning. Okay, so the day comes, I go to the studio. The keyboards, I get there. Angelo's already sitting behind the console. The keyboard's all set up. All right, this is the moment of truth, dude. So, you know, I get there, and Angelo's, well, why don't you just play it and, you know, just let me get some levels and stuff. So I'm calling up the different sounds. I'm assembling the patches, and I start. And Ronnie's sitting there, and he's doing whatever he was doing. He goes, you ready? Angelo, who's got the heaviest Brooklyn accent ever. So you ready? What are you going to do it? No, all right, fine. So he backs it up, and he takes it from the end of whatever was the da 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 da, whatever the part was, and then it da 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 da, and I just boom, and I start playing it, and I play it all the way through. And Angelo's like moving faders and stuff, and I'm just like, I hope I don't fuck this up. I hope I don't fuck this up. And I finish it, and rather than turning around and looking at me, Ronnie looks at Angelo, and he goes, "Did you get that?" And Angelo, who had learned his own self years ago, record everything. You can always erase it after the fact. He goes, "Yeah, sure." Ronnie turns to me. He goes, "Claude, that's the best fucking solo I've ever heard. Can you double it?" I'm like, fuck yeah. So I did it a second time, and then we did it a third time. We doubled the tracks on each side and placed them left and right. So in a stereo mix, what you're hearing in your left and right ear are my playing the same part 2 different times.
Wow.
And actually, what you're hearing is me playing the part 2 times. Well, actually, I guess 4 times. The 2 times on the left and the 2 times on the right. So there are slight differences. So here we go with the imperfections. Are they mistakes? Hell no. I did that on purpose. Ronnie had me do that on purpose. So that there were like slight discrepancies in the timing of the notes and stuff, which makes the notes sound fatter. That's the science of how getting a fatter sound works. So anyway, so that was it. And he turned around and he was just like, "Well, we're done. You can go home now." I was, "That's it?" He goes, "You nailed it, man." I said, "Really? I could try something." He goes, "You nailed it. It's done. It's on tape. We're finished." I mean, that was. Can you imagine what that was like for the 12-year-old inside my head?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it was just unbelievable. It was, and Ronnie never let me forget it. When I started doing the live solo, I think on the first couple of tours, it was piggybacked on the solo of the All the Fools Sailed Away track. So we'd get to the solo of the song, and then from there I would just go off on a different. As one reviewer in Houston called it, Claude Schnell's tantrum of a keyboard solo. So yeah, cool.
That's great.
Yeah.
I mean,
so, and to answer your question about the business thing, I think Ronnie was aware of all the business thing, but without putting too fine a point on it, I think Wendy had her own agenda as to how things were going to work best for her. That's all I'll say about that.
Yeah, no, I get that. And when to me, as a fan looking in from the outside, I see that being as, the destruction of this great lineup, because Vivian is gone, and then a little while later, you're gone, Vinny is gone. What was the final breaking point for you that you said, you know what, this isn't for me anymore, I have to go? Was it the changing guitar players again? Because I remember there's something with Gary Huey coming in, I think, and it didn't work out.
Well, that kind of set the stage for it. So Wendy had the great idea that since Craig had quit the band, incidentally, little known fact, Jimmy was on the precipice of getting fired. Ronnie had it one time too many with the machinations that Jimmy would get himself entangled in. And he had decided, that's it, I can't do it anymore. We're firing Jimmy. And for some reason, I had gone to Ronnie's house, and we were going to go to the office together, and he was going to fire him. And while we were there, the phone rang, and it was Craig, and all I heard was Ronnie's half of the conversation, and it was, "Oh yeah, hi Craig. Oh, really? Are you sure about this? No, that's fine if that's what you want to do. All right, goodbye." He hangs up the phone. He goes, "Craig just quit." I'm like, "What?" "Yep." I said, "Well, I guess it's Jimmy's lucky day, isn't it?" He goes, "Damn right." But we're still going to go. So because obviously replacing Craig was going to be hard enough, but replacing a guitar player and a bass player, that can be difficult. I don't know if you know the story about the Babies, Tony Brock's band.
No.
Well, it's a similar kind of thing. When John Waite left to become John Waite, Jonathan Cain, who was their keyboard player, quit at the same time, and the Babies were beyond repair because they had lost, their keyboard player, their singer, and their bass player, and that was basically it. Tony went on to play with Rod Stewart after that, which, by the way, wasn't a bad option. So, but yes, back to the breakup thing. So, I knew that Vinny, who was my best friend at the time, best friend for many years. He was planning to leave the band once the record was done anyway, because he was going to play in a band with Jeff Pilson, and who else was going to be in that band? I think it was, Householder? What was that guy's name, the guitar player?
Joe Hasselvander? Joe Hasselvander?
Householder. No, Householder is his last name.
Oh, no.
Eric, or he played with Rob Halford for a while. No, that ringing a bell?
No,
Darren Holder? Not important. Anyway, Jeff. Well, you know who Jeff Pilson is, of course. So
yes.
Jeff Pilson was putting a band together called maybe War and Peace, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah, War and Peace. Yeah.
There you go. That'd be a good name for a rooming list, Mr. War and Peace. I'm gonna have to remember that if I ever go on tour again. So yeah, so Vinny was committed to doing that with Jeff. But when Craig quit, and after Jimmy got his final warning that this is the last straw, blah blah blah, Wendy decided it would be a good idea to just kind of have a cattle call for guitar players. Unbelievably huge mistake. For starters, it was 3 months of listening to shoeboxes full of cassettes. Every day we'd go to Ronnie's house, and another dozen cassettes would take up, hours of our time as we just listened to this meandering musical, whatever it was. There was nothing inspiring in the bunch. There'd be like a hint of something, and then it would just go on into like the doodle 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 kind of stuff, and it was just like forget it. So, but it was well publicized that Dio was looking for a guitar player, and I happened to be at the car dealer getting my car worked on, and the parts guy, he says, Claude, is it true that Dio's still looking for a guitar player? I'm like, well, yeah, as a matter of fact, why? He goes, because my guitar teacher rocks. This guy is unbelievable. You really got to give him a listen. I'm like, really? I'm telling you, I wouldn't steer you wrong. This guy is amazing. I think he could be the perfect missing link. So he gave me the guy's number. I called him up. It was Gary Hoey, and we spoke a little bit. He seemed like a very, very nice guy. Gary's from Boston, so there's that that Boston matter of factness kind of thing.
Yeah.
He said he would send me some stuff because before I'd present him to Ronnie, of course, I wanted to listen myself. The next day it was overnighted. Even though we're both in L.A., he just he took the initiative to make sure I'd get it right away, and it was brilliant. It was just like, holy crap, where's this guy been hiding? So I played it for Ronnie, and Ronnie was like, hell yeah, get this guy in. Oh, super, okay. I let Gary know. We set it up. Gary came down. Now, we had been auditioning many other players by the time Gary came along, and now we were already past the shoebox stage, and we had people coming in. But that was almost as big of a waste of time as the shoebox period was, because these guys would come in like in stage gear and with guitars that they couldn't tune or broken strings. I mean, nobody who was delightfully professional. I mean, it was quite a. Again, bear in mind this is L.A., not to cast dispersions about my town, but there were a lot of guys who had no business showing up for an audition with Ronnie. That's just and probably 5 years before, Ronnie never would have tolerated. But anyway, finally the time comes for Gary to come in. He shows up. He wheels in his own gear. He's wearing jeans and a T-shirt. The deal was you had to learn 3 songs. You had to learn, I think it was Stand Up and Shout, Rainbow in the Dark, and something else. And something else was the player's choice. So Gary would wheel in. I think he had one of the early Pitbull amps, just a 412 cabinet in the head. I think he was playing his Les Paul, if I'm not mistaken, whatever it was. He came in with one guitar, one head, one amp, rolled it in, checked the tuning, plugged it in. He goes, all right, I'm ready. Ronnie's like, well, what song would you like to do? He goes, whatever you want. He goes, well, no, I mean of the 3. And Gary's like, no, whatever you want. What do you mean, whatever I want? Yeah, anything. Really? Well, let's start with Stand Up and Shout and see how it goes. And Gary just boom breaks into it, and it was. Believe me when I tell you, it was fucking amazing.
Yeah.
It was like all by himself, no studio, no fucking double tracking. It sounded amazing. It was like a wall of sound. My aforementioned line of little notes in armor marching down the field of battle, that was coming out of Gary's amp, all by himself. And we kind of looked at each other and I was like, "Wow, this is pretty cool." And it was such. To be fair, part of our relation was the counterpoint between Gary's performance and the 36 guys who came before him who really had no business being there was just spectacularly obvious. And after that, we did Rainbow in the Dark again, perfect. Then we did Neon Nights again, perfect. And Ronnie's like, "All right, how about Last Night?" Sure. And he started. He learned basically our entire catalog. I mean, we didn't do every single song, but anything Ronnie called out, he was ready to play and played it as if he'd been doing it his whole life. So we probably the typical audition was like 25 minutes because we wanted to keep some kind of schedule because there were so many clowns coming and going. But Gary was there well over an hour, and we were getting a little tired because we were playing so hard. It felt that good. You know how when you're tired and it's tired in a good way.
Yeah,
you did what you wanted to do. That's what it felt like, and we're like looking at each other. In fact, Jimmy and Vinny were going off on tangents by themselves, which was something that very, very rarely happened. I mean, they usually played. I mean, Vinny would always throw things in to screw us up just for fun, but Jimmy was sufficiently motivated by how well Gary was playing that he was taking liberties on the bass, something that I'd never heard before nor after. it was fun. That you know what? That's the word. I didn't even think of that until just now. But it was fun. We were having fun, which, by the way, is what it's supposed to be about, right?
Yeah, sure.
Ronnie was singing his ass off. It was great. So we finish up, and Ronnie's like, "Oh, thanks so much for coming down, man. I was just great. Let me walk you out." So they go out together, and the three of us, Vinny and Jimmy and myself, were like, "Well, thank God this audition thing is over, because clearly this is going to be the guy." And we're like, "Oh man, that was a good find, man. You really found somebody great." I'm like, "Hey, not me. It's the parts guy at the pork shop. Nothing to do with me." And I'm thinking, yeah, my stock's going to go up a little bit because I walked this guy in. And 5 minutes later, Ronnie walks back in, and he puts his arms out. He goes, "Guys, you're going to hate me for this, but he's not the one." And you could just feel the collective stomachs of the three of us just fall to the floor. What do you mean? Right? Vinny was probably the most vocal. He goes, I thought he was great. He goes, he was great, but he's not right for this band. Trust me, I know what this band needs, and it's not him. Okay, I mean, what are you going to say to that, right? No,
yeah.
There's nothing you can say. The band is called Dio, and it's called Dio for a reason. So then he said, I think what we really need is like we had with Viv. We need a European guitarist. And like a couple of days later, through I think who's my counterpart who played keyboards in Europe, Don Airey. Don Airey had produced a band I think that Rowan was in, and somehow Ronnie got wind of this guitar player Rowan, who was supposed to be really, really great. Got a video, got some stuff, and granted, Rowan's a fine musician, but again, he was like 16 or just to turn 17. The three of us thought, I don't care how good this guy is, he's not going to be better than Gary was. So I think for Vinny, that was the final straw that pushed him into the decision to go play with War and Peace. I don't think if Gary would have gotten the gig, Vinny would have left. And if Vinny wouldn't have left, I certainly wouldn't have left. It would have been a very, very different scenario. Because the circumstance under which it all fell apart was Rowan came in, he auditioned, he was okay, got the gig, but then we started working. And, bless his heart, he's a young kid. He doesn't have the calloused innards that the rest of us had to put up with, what Ronnie expects and when he expects it. So we'd be working on parts, and Ronnie would change them, 6 ways to Sunday at any given moment. And Rowan had trouble, following it along. It was a very ambitious regiment that Ronnie put everybody through. And Rowan, he'd literally just gotten off not the boat, but may as well have been. And at one point, Ronnie really got upset with Rowan, and he started excoriating him. He was just yelling up and down, and what else do you have to do? I mean, it wasn't his finest moment. And Jimmy, who was less than sober, I'll just put it that way.
Yeah.
Do you remember the Chevy Chase Jane Curtin news thing on
Saturday Night Live? Yeah.
Yeah. Or Dan Aykroyd, I'm sorry, Dan Aykroyd, where Jane, you ignorant slut, and he would start or Chevy Chase would start mimicking Dan Aykroyd or one of those, like behind his back, like goofy face kind of thing. Jimmy started doing that behind Ronnie, which admittedly was pretty funny, but Ronnie turned on his heel and caught Jimmy at the moment he was doing it. And that was it. He was like an M80 that had no fuse left. He exploded. He was furious. Understandably, because Jimmy's a guy that Ronnie pulled out of the muck more times than one can count. And here he is goofing on him behind his back like Ronnie's the idiot.
Yeah.
Sorry. I mean, I believe Ronnie would be the first to acknowledge that wasn't one of his finest moments, and he was under a lot of pressure, and he never should have lashed out at Rowan as he did. And I'm pretty sure Rowan was probably okay with it because young kids they're pretty resilient.
Yeah,
exactly. But Ronnie turned around, he grabbed his book, he goes, "If this is all this big of a joke to you guys, then fuck it, I'm out of here." Oh, I'm sorry, I misspoke. He turns around, he sees Jimmy, and he grabs his stuff, and there's that moment of silence, and it was hysterical. I mean, I'm really stifling a laugh, but I'm not doing a very good job of it. I'm like, I didn't want to laugh out loud because I just knew that would infuriate him only further.
Yeah.
But Ronnie's too smart to be fooled by my efforts of trying to keep a straight face. And I kind of lost it. I'm like, it came out, and he points his finger right in my face. He goes, "What do you find so fucking funny? You know, if you guys think this is all," and he grabbed his shit. He goes, "Rehearsal is done. As far as I'm concerned, we're done." And out he went, slammed the door behind him, and Vinny was like, "Well, I guess rehearsal's over." So off we go. The next morning, I get a call from the office that my presence has been requested, which didn't sound good.
Yeah.
So I get there, and I meet with Wendy, and she goes, "Right, so I've summoned you here because two things. I want you to know that Jimmy's been fired, and you're next unless Ronnie gets an apology from you before you leave this office."
Wow.
And to which I said, if anybody deserves an apology, it's me, because I'm not apologizing for his. I'm not going to tell you what I said, but what I said, I was done. I was not. There was nothing for me to apologize about. I mean, I had a completely natural reaction to a stressful situation. In fact, I think, as memory serves, I even said, "Come on, it's not that big a deal. Let's go to the pub. Rowan can work on the parts. We'll come back. I'm sure we'll have it by then. You guys want to go to the pub? You go to the pub." And then, off he went. Okay, fine. So I wasn't about to apologize. I'm like, "I'm sorry. There's nothing for me to apologize about." And again, I knew Vinny was leaving anyway, which meant Vinny was gone. Jimmy was now gone. I wasn't Rowan's biggest fan. And if Ronnie's going to start behaving this way, I got better things to do with my time. So I told Wendy, I said, "No, I'm not going to apologize. I have nothing to apologize for. If anything, Ronnie owes us an apology." She goes, "Yeah, I figured you'd say that," and I told him as much, but Ronnie insisted, so I guess that's it. I'm like, "Okay, see ya." I went to Vinny's house, and Jimmy was already there, and the three of us had cocktails all afternoon.
Wow.
Ronnie called me the next day, and I thought, "Oh, here it comes." And he's like, "Look, Wendy told me what you said, and I'm not going to say that you were wrong, but if you want to be in this band, I still want you to be in the band." And much to my own surprise, I told him no. I said, I've been paid to do the record. I'll do the record, but I've got to go on to do other things. He goes, "Like what?" I said, "Well, I'm not quite sure yet, but I don't know what to tell you, Ronnie. I just there's other music that I need to be doing." And funnily enough, like a few months later, I went and saw him at a show, and he said, "The best thing you ever did was actually." That's right. I had already started writing some material, and I was about to start working with Neil Turbin of Anthrax fame.
Yeah, yeah.
Another New Yorker.
That's
by
right.
The way,
You can't get rid of us.
An infinitely better singer than you'd believe from what he did with Anthrax. This guy had pipes for days. He really, maybe he still will do something with them. But I had my own material. I wanted to move into something else, and when I saw Ronnie at a gig that he had done with, I don't even remember who was in the band anymore, but it was, oh, you know what? By then it might have been World War III by then, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, Mandy Lion.
Right, exactly. And Ronnie was like, the best thing you did was follow your own path. You're far too good of a keyboard player to just be playing, the piddly parts I come up with for you. I'm like, first of all, they're not piddly parts. And second of all, playing with you is the greatest honor I ever could have dreamt of having. He goes, yeah, I know you think you're supposed to say that, but I'm telling you, as your friend, I'm looking forward to what you're going to do, which was like just the most unbelievable thing to hear from him.
I can imagine.
So
Claude, go ahead.
Yeah. I was just going to say, you asked me what precipitated it all falling apart, and that's basically I know it was a long story, but that's basically
no. It was a great story. It's all Roman's fault.
Yeah.
No, but I was going to say, I only have like a few minutes left in the show. I could talk to you forever. I mean, so we're going to make this part one because I want to close out with a song. But when the book is done and it comes out, come back on. We will have the whole 3-hour show together, just you and I, and we're going to pick up because I wanted to talk about Mark Edwards and so many other bands that you've played with to put a part of. But
Sure.
which I only got a few minutes left, so I can't. But I want to play one more of your songs before I end it. But please come back on again, and we'll do the whole 3-hour show, and we'll pick up right here where we left off the next time, and we'll talk about the book more importantly, which I'm looking forward to.
Without question, question, my friend. It was an absolute pleasure speaking with you.
The pleasure was mine, Claude. When do you think we're going to see the book? Is it coming soon, or are you just starting to work on it?
It has begun. Sadly, for the past few months, I've had other things occupying my attention, so I've not been able to move forward on it. But I'm hoping that by summer I will start working in earnest. If all goes blissfully well, hopefully by next spring.
That would be fantastic. I can't wait to talk to you again, Claude. This has been such an honor for me. I mean, you were a great guest and an amazing interview, and I feel like I didn't even get halfway through, but we're almost 2 hours into it. But what an honor, my friend.
Well, again, the pleasure was absolutely mine. You're so knowledgeable, and you're so. I mean, I feel like I've known you my whole life already, anyway. So.
That's Brooklyn,
course, the
guys.
Fact that you talk like this doesn't hurt. Right?
Of course, when you're from Brooklyn, that's the way we
are.
are.
So, you've got my contact information. So keep in touch, and I will do likewise. And congratulations on your new grandson, by the way.
Thank you very much, Claude. I appreciate that. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. I know we're going to do this again real soon and continue this story.
I look forward to it.
Take care, friend. Have a great night.
You take care of yourself.
You too.
Thanks
bye-bye.
For having me. All right, bye-bye.
Claude, I mean, I wish I would have had Claude call in at 6 o'clock so we could have kept this thing going, but we got to wrap it up here tonight. We only allowed 3 hours. So how about we do All the Full Sail Away? We'll end it with that. If I have time, maybe I can get on a rough cut track. We'll see how that works out. But hey, I want to thank Claude. I want to thank Mark for being on tonight's show. And next week, who do we have next? Oh, next week we got a great show next week. Michael Kiskis from Halloween. The band is coming to the USA next week. They're going to start their tour. We'll have Michael on the show and Greg Cicero from Forbidden. So don't forget to tune in next Sunday night. How about we close it out with the song he talked about in his great solo, All the Full Sail Away. Take care, everybody. Have a great week, and I'll see you next Sunday night.
There's perfect harmony in the rising and the falling of the sea. And as we sail along, I never fail to be astounded by the things we'll do for pride.